Welcome back to Pokemon episode summaries. Today, I'll be doing episode 177, The Trouble with Snubbull. The episode begins with Ash and the gang taking a break on their way to Acrotique City by a river, when suddenly, Pikachu and Ash both spot none other than Snubbull as Pikachu's ears twitch, indicating that it noticed it. Ash insists that it wasn't just any Snubbull, when Brock suggests that it was probably just a regular-ass wild one, due to Ash explaining that he noticed the Snubbull's red ribbons, indicating that it was Madame Muchmoney's. That's right, Madame Muchmoney's Snubbull had returned. Misty and Brock, not having actually saw the Snubbull themselves, were skeptical of what Ash claimed though, as they couldn't see anything, so they doubted that Ash even saw Snubbull to begin with. As for where the Snubbull had went, well, it had currently managed to find Team Rocket, wanting to find Meowth just like before, and clamping on its tail. Team Rocket was currently walking along a path, complaining about how hungry they were, with Jessie stating that she would do anything for a bite. Upon hearing the word bite, Snubbull instantly took action and bit Meowth's tail. Despite Meowth's screams of pain, Team Rocket didn't care, as they were still immensely enamored by the Snubbull from the last time, with Jessie still viewing it as super beautiful, so she told Meowth to quit his fucking screaming and just be grateful that Snubbull seemed to like him. However, Meowth rebutted that he simply hated the stupid Snubbull, which caused the Snubbull to get sad, but Meowth didn't care, as he used all his might to shake Snubbull off of his tail. Meanwhile, Ash and the gang were looking through the nearby forest by the river at Ash's insistence, as he still claimed that he saw Madame Muchmoney's Snubbull, stating that it simply just got away by this point, with Misty and Brock still skeptical. However, Ash and the gang soon put this conversation aside, as they then spot a man who was complaining about thirst, practically keeling over, so Brock happily gives him a sip of water from his water canteen. And the man instantly feels better, now able to actually use his fucking brain again, and since he could, he recognized Ash and the gang as the people who had previously saved Madame Muchmoney's Snubbull. Upon the mention of Madame Muchmoney, Ash and the gang then recognized this man as Jeeves, one of Madame Muchmoney's butlers. They immediately questioned what a fancy man like himself was doing in the middle of the woods, with Jeeves revealing that he had been there a long time, and had come into the woods with Madame Muchmoney, but had got separated from her when Madame Muchmoney went to go looking for food. Before Ash and the gang can question why Madame Muchmoney was in the woods, like, yeah, okay, her butler was, but they still didn't explain why they were in the woods, especially since, Madame Muchmoney was so rich and shit, like, she probably wouldn't want to be in the woods, right? But suddenly, Madame Muchmoney then arrived, swinging down on it from a nearby vine. Ash and the gang instantly become even more weirded out, as they noticed that Madame Muchmoney was wearing a whole bunch of ripped clothes, and she just had a more general rough appearance, and they were shocked by this, obviously, because Madame Muchmoney was supposed to be rich and professional. She was even fucking barefoot in the middle of the woods, like, what the hell? It was like a 180 for her personality. Misty and Brock tried to question her about this, but she simply stated with excitement that she had found mushrooms, and invited Ash and the gang to join her and the butler for some lunch, consisting entirely of mushroom soup. As Brock and Misty finally question her on her now rough exterior, Ash questions her on where her Snubbull was, remembering that he had saw it before, and was shocked to see that it wasn't with her, although he didn't tell Madame Muchmoney about the last part, he simply asked where it was. Essentially, Madame Muchmoney reveals that Snubbull had run away once again, so Madame Muchmoney and her butler set off to find her, and they've essentially been traveling the entire world to do so. Although by world, she likely just meant the Johto region, but regardless, due to all this traveling, that has what has caused her rough exterior, as she's been in plenty of forest by this point. She also adds that Snubbull had been missing ever since Ash and the gang left when they built the new park for it, which we already knew, as we saw the scene, and she also clarifies that although she hadn't found her Snubbull yet, she had found that she actually had a pretty good muscle that she didn't know about, after fully developing it from all of the adventuring she's been doing. Brock excitedly states that Snubbull going missing may have actually worked in her favor, because now that she had developed those muscles, and was just in better shape in general, she could become a Pokemon trainer to the Snubbull, instead of just its caretaker, so therefore she could become a better role model to it, due to how strong she was, preventing Snubbull from ever running off again. Jeeves reminded Brock, though, that even if Madame Muchmoney was able to stop Snubbull from running off now, it still didn't mean that Snubbull hadn't run off before, and now she might not be able to find it to train it anyways. Ash then realizes that since he had saw Snubbull before, he could potentially help Madame Muchmoney locate it, so he finally tells her that he had seen it earlier, and this obviously shocks both her and Jeeves. And upon hearing this, Madame Muchmoney and Jeeves request that Ash help them find Snubbull, and Ash agrees, stating that if they were going to do so, then they should utilize something with Snubble's scent. Madame Muchmoney doesn't ask any questions, and gives Ash a ribbon that Snubbull used to wear, and Ash then gives it to Pikachu so he can track the ribbon's scent. And that's what he begins to do, leading Ash and the gang, Madame Muchmoney and Jeeves along a path. Meanwhile, as for where Snubbull actually was, it had since left Team Rocket due to Meowth's rejection of it, and was sitting on a rock sadly, thinking of the rejection. It was obsessively in love with Meowth and his tail still. So, when it heard something in the bushes, it immediately hoped that it was Meowth, as it fantasized that Meowth was going to come out of the bush and give her some flowers, and apologize to her, and let it gnaw on his tail all it wanted. And she begins to think, just being so insane at this point, that her fantasies were reality, as she spots a tail in the bushes. So she runs up to go nod, thinking it was Meowth's, but it was actually a Mankey's, who punches her off and runs off. With the Mankey gone, Snubbull simply laid there knocked out, until it was found by Pikachu using the ribbon, and when Madame Muchmoney spotted it, she immediately recognized that it was injured as fuck, and panicked. Brock suggests that Snubbull needed a Pokemon Center to heal up, so they take her to one, and Nurse Joy performs an examination with a stethoscope to see what Snubble's main injuries were, but she declares that Snubbull was actually uninjured and just a bit shaken up with a few minor scratches. Huh, that's surprising. You think it would be more injured after fucking getting punched out, but okay. Everyone else was simply relieved that Snubble was okay, but Brock rightfully questioned how the fuck Snubble had no injuries when it was literally beat up. However, he quickly stops his questions after realizing that Nurse Joy obviously knew what she was doing, and he proceeds to flirt with her, as usual, leading Misty to drag him away, telling him that the only reason he should be talking to Nurse Joy was if he needed a checkup on his goddamn brain. Oh shit. Anyways, Madame Muchmoney then goes up to her Snubble and states how glad she was that it was safe, and begs her to not run away again, trying to persuade her by saying that she could now play all she wanted in her backyard, not having to leave, because even though Madame Muchmoney had already went as far to make an entire play area for Snubble, after Snubble had left again, she had begun renovations on making her backyard an entire fucking nature preserve. So yeah, Snubble really had no right to leave here. It had an entire nature preserve to itself now. However, Snubble still seemed uninterested at the fact that she had an entire nature preserve to herself now, so Jeeves tried to further entice her by stating that it was worth millions and millions of dollars. But obviously, Snubble didn't care about this either. Madame Muchmoney then tried to entice her by saying that now that Madame Muchmoney was a lot stronger, she could even play with Snubble in the park. This obviously didn't excite Snubble either, as Snubble hated Muchmoney. Ash pointed out how Snubble didn't seem excited by anything that Madame Muchmoney or her butler were mentioning, and Madame Muchmoney had realized this too, but she was panicking a lot more. She didn't understand the reason why Snubble was so against all of this, and presumed that she had perhaps picked up some trauma when she got knocked out, and now she was just unable to be happy at anything. So she asked Nurse Joy to perform some psychological tests on Snubble to see what was wrong, and Nurse Joy agreed. Later that night, after Nurse Joy had done the tests, Snubble was laying down in her patient bed, still healing from the minor injuries that she had sustained, when she sees the moon out the window, which instantly makes her think of Meowth, since she knew that Meowth loved the moon so much. This inspires her to ignore Meowth's rejection and go searching for him yet again, being absolutely desperate for him, so she jumps out of her patient bed and out the window, right as Nurse Joy comes in to inform her that the test results had turned out good. So Nurse Joy sees the empty bed and that the window was wide open, knowing that Snubble must have escaped. The next morning, Team Rocket was overjoyed, as they had actually managed to find some food, being some apples, in an apple orchard, and they had ate them to their heart's content. However, Team Rocket wasn't entirely happy, as Jessie and James were still somewhat mad at Meowth for scaring away the Snubble, so they questioned why he did so, with Meowth simply rebutting that he had to do what he had to do to make sure that Snubble wouldn't take his goddamn place. Suddenly, as Team Rocket approach a town, they hear some voices, so they decide to hide behind a bush. They then see that the source of these voices were Ash and the gang and Madame Muchmoney and her butler, who had since left the Pokemon Center to search for where Snubble had went off to. Upon realizing that Madame Muchmoney would likely be very desperate to get her Snubble back, Jessie and James get the idea to try and find the Snubble so that they could give it to her, and therefore, the rich lady would probably give them a whole bunch of money as a reward. And even if they didn't, then they could simply hold Snubble as hostage and demand that the rich lady give them money. Meowth was against this plan, though, as he knew that if Team Rocket were planning to capture Snubble, then he was likely going to be used as the bait with his tail. And he was right, as Jessie and James simply stared at him evilly and proceeded to tie him up to a tree. They then left Meowth tied to the tree as bait, as they went to go hide behind bushes so they could sneak up on Snubble when it went to go gnaw on Meowth's tail. They performed their long-ass motto while they waited. While Meowth complained about being used as bait and being tied to a tree, Team Rocket simply told him to shut the fuck up, saying that with all the money that they would get from this, they would buy him a new tail if his tail got bitten off by Snubble. The thought of Meowth losing his tail only upsets him even more, though, so he instead just thinks about purely getting the money, nothing to do with his goddamn tail. Snubble then eventually shows up as Team Rocket come out from behind the bushes to sneak up on her. However, it seemed like she wasn't enticed by Meowth's tail, so she immediately directed her attention to Jessie and James, who were being a little too loud while doing their sneaking. Upon being spotted, Jessie and James tried to calmly call for Snubble to come towards them, trying to convince it that they weren't trying to do anything to harm it, but Snubble had a different idea. It didn't think that Team Rocket was trying to hurt it, no, but it thought that Team Rocket was trying to hurt Meowth after seeing how they had tied him up. So, Snubble was extremely angry. It was so angry that that's why it decided not to bite on Meowth's tail, but instead take out its anger on Team Rocket by evolving into Gramble out of sheer anger. Jessie and James were obviously shocked and frightened at this evolution, but Meowth was by far the most frightened, as he feared that maybe Gramble would try and bite his tail, so he tried his best to wriggle his way out of being tied up. Wobbuffet then forcibly appeared out of his Pokeball, but for once, Jessie decided not to recall him, since she needed a Pokemon to battle against Gramble anyways. However, as soon as Wobbuffet spotted the Gramble, it immediately started to run away in fear, so Jessie decided that recalling it was the best option, and she sent out Arbok instead. Jessie orders Arbok to tackle the Gramble, but before it can get a tackle off, Gramble sees Arbok's tail and fantasizes about it being Meowth's, so she ends up biting Arbok's tail. So James then gets the idea to send out his Weezing and have him use Smokescreen, which causes Gramble to start coughing, so it drops Arbok's tail from its mouth, freeing Arbok. Meowth then manages to escape from being tied up due to all the thrashing he did, as well as biting the rope, and he then proceeds to pull out a remote control from out of nowhere, which summons a huge Meowth mech. Meowth jumps in it and starts it up, with Jessie and James following, hoping to escape Gramble's wrath. Once Jessie and James were inside, Meowth got the idea to wag the Meowth robot's tail, which obviously drew Gramble's attention to it, thinking it was actually Meowth's, so she proceeded to gnaw on it. Meowth then drops a cage from the Meowth robot, and tries to maneuver the robot to place Gramble inside of it from the back where it was biting the tail. However, Gramble refused to let go of the tail, so that meant it wasn't going inside the cage. Meowth tries to wag the tail to shake her off, but she still doesn't let go. Just then, having heard all the commotion, Ash and the gang arrive along with Madame Muchmoney and her butler, and they spot the Gramble, which Madame Muchmoney instantly recognizes as her Snubble, since it had the same ribbons. Upon spotting Madame Muchmoney, Jessie, James, and Meowth remember that they wanted the reward from her, so they come out of the Meowth robot, and Ash and the gang instantly question why they were trying to capture Granbull, as they noticed Meowth trying to put it into the cage. Team Rocket lies that they were only trying to capture the Granbull so that they could return it to Madame Muchmoney, stating that they had been looking all over for it. Ash and the gang are obviously suspicious of this, because why the fuck would Team Rocket want to help Madame Muchmoney for no reason? Although, Rocket did begin to get a little convinced, wondering if maybe Team Rocket had turned good, but Misty and Brock quickly shut him up, knowing that Team Rocket was likely just putting on a charade. However, this charade had unfortunately convinced Madame Muchmoney and her butler, who thanked Team Rocket for finding her Snubble, now a Gramble, with Madame Muchmoney offering them a reward, just as Team Rocket had planned. However, they start to get a little greedy, and claim that no thanks was necessary, and that Madame Muchmoney's happiness was their reward, in hopes that this would make Madame Muchmoney like them more, so that she would in turn give them more money. But much to their dismay, Madame Muchmoney actually takes this seriously, and she's like, okay, I guess they don't want a reward then, and simply goes to retrieve her Gramble from the Meowth robot's tail, along with her butler. Meowth, Jessie, and James instantly regretted their greediness, as now they weren't going to get a reward at all. Anyways, when Madame Muchmoney and her butler reached the Meowth robot, they tried their best to get Gramble to let go of the tail, but she absolutely refused. And Meowth, still wanting to get Gramble off the tail as well, so that it could land in the cage, tries to electrocute the Gramble by using a shock on the Meowth mech, but Gramble still doesn't let go. The shock does hit Madame Muchmoney and Jeeves as well, though, and it causes them to let go of Gramble. Madame Muchmoney tries to grab Gramble again, but Meowth simply shakes the Meowth robot's tail in an attempt to get Gramble off, but this once again only affects Madame Muchmoney and her butler as they go tumbling down after being hit by the tail. After only seeing Madame Muchmoney and Jeeves being hurt by Team Rocket's attacks, Ash and the gang think that Team Rocket was purposely only trying to shake them off, even though that wasn't the case. And once they explain this to Madame Muchmoney and Jeeves, Madame Muchmoney instantly calls off any potential reward that Team Rocket would get. Although it's not like she was going to give them one anyways, but because of this, James and Jessie are obviously very mad at Meowth, because he kept failing to shake Gramble off. And they believe that if he did so, then Madame Muchmoney would have eventually gave them a reward, so they proceeded to beat Meowth up for his failures. Jessie and James then decide that they should still try and make the best out of the situation, and try and get something out of it, so they make Ash and the gang an offer, saying that they would give back the Gramble if Ash gave them Pikachu. Although, Team Rocket should have remembered that it would have been hard to get Gramble off of the tail. So, hopefully it would, otherwise their plan would be fucked. But, their plan was fucked anyways, as Ash obviously refused to give them Pikachu. And he simply orders Pikachu to use Thunderbolt to send Team Rocket blasting off, but Misty stops him, as she reminds him that if he used Thunderbolt, then he would blast Gramble off as well. This leads Ash to send out Cyndaquil instead, knowing that Cyndaquil's flamethrower probably wouldn't hit the Gramble, so he orders Cyndaquil to aim his flamethrower on the robot specifically, which causes the inside of the robot to heat up. Knowing that this could obviously mean that the machine could explode, Meowth tries to press a button to cool it down, but he accidentally presses the button that activates the tail, sending it launching like a missile, with Gramble still on it. Madame Muchmoney thinks that she can stop the missile with her newfound strength. However, she wasn't strong enough to stop it in its tracks, obviously, so she ends up going flying along with the Gramble into a tree. Hey, at least the missile was stopped by a tree, right? And with the tail crashing into the tree, it caused Gramble to finally let go of the tail and fall to the ground. Madame Muchmoney instantly checks up on her Gramble to make sure it was okay, and states that now that she was stronger, she wanted to use Gramble to battle Team Rocket, and Gramble agreed. After seeing how Madame Muchmoney had tried to save it, essentially, Madame Muchmoney had now earned her respect, which was also due to Madame Muchmoney agreeing to not call Snubble, or I guess the Gramble now, by any more of its cutesy nicknames, so that the Gramble could feel more intimidating, like it had wanted to. Madame Muchmoney then taunts Team Rocket, saying that they were going to get their reward, as she orders Gramble to use Takedown. Meowth responds by launching the Meowth mech's hands at Gramble, but Gramble is able to completely destroy them with the Takedown. Except for one, but she does manage to dodge out of that one's way, and then uses the momentum from the dodge to pivot to the center of the Meowth mech and tackle it right at the center. This pushes the machine back a bit, allowing Team Rocket to get distracted so Gramble could go up to the Meowth mech's face and use a dynamic punch on it to break into the cockpit and smash the controls. Gramble then jumps out, and with the controls destroyed, the mech goes haywire, spinning around in circles, until it eventually crashed into a tree. With the mech down, Ash told Pikachu to use Thunderbolt, sending Team Rocket blasting off, fully destroying their mech in the process. With Team Rocket gone, Madame Muchmoney and Gramble hug each other, as Madame Muchmoney declares that now they would be a perfect team. Madame Muchmoney then thanks Ash and the gang for all their help, and states that they were going to go back to her mansion now. So Jeeves offers to get the limousine, but Madame Muchmoney declines, stating that her and Gramble were going to race back to the mansion on foot to toughen themselves up. That's what they decide to do as they run off towards the mansion, as Ash and the gang watch. Glad to see that Madame Muchmoney and Gramble had now actually formed a close enough bond to be able to willingly do shit together, and that Madame Muchmoney had finally moved on from solely relying on all of her riches due to being toughened up. In fact, that was probably why Gramble respected her now in the first place, because she didn't rely on all her rich shit, and was instead just a normal person now. The episode then ends as Ash and the gang say goodbye to the butler and continue on their journey, with this whole Snubble Gramble subplot now being resolved. If only the Jigglypuff one would get resolved next.